As you dive deeper into videography, you'll realize that shaping and cutting light is just as important, if not more so, than simply adding more light. On larger productions, a wide range of tools are used for this, and one of the most common ones is something that's called a floppy. A floppy, or sometimes referred to as a floppy flag, is simply a large frame with a black piece of fabric attached to it that can be angled and positioned in different ways to block and shape light. One of the main ways to use a floppy is to create negative fill. This is where you block light from one side of your subject to add a bit more contrast and give your scene depth. You can also use a floppy to block unwanted light from hitting surrounding parts of your shot, keeping the viewer's focus on your subject. Though unfortunately what I found is that here in Australia, professional floppies can cost upwards of $400. That's a lot of money for something that's essentially a frame with a bit of fabric attached to it, especially if you're still experimenting and figuring out how you want to use this tool in your productions. And I myself wanted to start practicing with this tool, but I couldn't really justify the cost at this stage. So I decided to build my own DIY floppy for about $60. And here are the parts that I used, and you can find all the places where I bought them from in the description. When I first started this journey, I needed to find the right frame size. After a bit of research online, I found that the most common size for floppy is 40 by 40 or 1 meter by 1 meter. This size tends to be large enough to effectively cut light, and that's what I settled on. With this size in mind, I began to look at pre-made options online, and what I did find was a budget frame from a brand called Fumeto. But even the budget option was a bit more expensive than what I was looking to spend, and it actually did not include the floppy fabric at that price. And that's when I turned to looking at DIY options. I did see different DIY floppies online that were built with welding, power tools, or PVC pipes, but since I don't have a workshop or a wide range of tools, I was quite limited to only considering the PVC option. And I did go into my local hardware store where I tested the PVC pipes with the PVC elbow joints, but I found that they were quite flimsy and they didn't hold the frame structure well enough, so I scrapped that idea. And at this point, I had an idea which I hadn't really seen anyone talking about online, which was using commonly available and inexpensive metal curtain rods. I found a nearby store that sold 1 meter long curtain rods with a 16mm diameter. At the same store, they actually sold plastic elbow joints for joining these 16mm rods, so it seemed like the perfect solution. But when I got home, I realized that the plastic elbow joints wouldn't lock into the rods properly. They just slipped out, they couldn't hold the structure together, and they were a bit more for decorative purposes. And so the curtain rods were fine, but I needed a better solution for the joints. I remembered that I had some reflector holder clips lying around, and I found that the top part of these clips was actually removable, leaving me with an elbow joint that I could use to join the rods. After testing, the structure was sturdy, but there was a problem. The rods were extremely tight in the joints and it took a lot of force to remove. Though I figured I could resolve this with a bit of sanding and WD-40, so I bought 2 more of these reflector holder clips. However, when the additional clips arrived, they didn't match the old ones. The new ones had newer written on top of them, which the old ones didn't, and one size didn't even fit the rods at all, so I returned them and I kept looking for an alternative. Eventually, I did find an inexpensive flash bracket mount on Temu that could be swiveled into an elbow joint. I'd heard mixed reviews about Temu, but at about $6 each, I thought it was worth a shot. The flash brackets arrived, and while they definitely weren't top tier quality, they were good enough for this project. Like with the reflector holder clips, the rods fit tightly into the joints, and I had to sand them down and use WD-40 to make it easier to insert and remove the rods. But at least all the holes were the same size, and the rods did fit. Though, if I was starting over, I'd definitely opt in for a smaller curtain rod diameter, maybe 15mm in diameter. This would allow me to avoid all the sanding and force that was needed. Whilst this has gotten better over time, the tight fit of the 60mm curtain rod scrapes the inside rubber coating of the flash brackets, leaving all these little rubber bits that you later have to vacuum up. But with the frame sorted, it was now time to add the fabric. I settled on a cloth that was 1.5 meters by 2 meters, which is enough to cover the frame and hang out the back to create the desired floppy shape. And after checking out a few local fabric stores, I ended up settling on a budget option from AliExpress for about $19. It was cheaper than the local stores and apparently designed for blocking light in photographic scenarios. The fabric did fit the frame reasonably well, although it was a bit more see-through than I'd hoped. But the great thing about this setup is that I can always swap the fabric for something thicker or opt in to use diffusion or bounce cloths in the future. So here's the final result. For now, I'm just holding up the frame on a couple of light stands with some clamps that I had lying around, and then I'm attaching the fabric to the curtain rods with some office binder clips. This gets the job done for now, but it can definitely be improved in the future. And the good thing is that when I'm done using the floppy, I can disassemble the frame and store it away. Visually, the floppy does a solid job of blocking unwanted light and creating contrast on your subject. I found that it's particularly useful in scenarios where you have a lot of light shining on your subject from both above and to the side, and this one tool can quickly flag light off from both angles and maintain contrast on your subject. As the project went on, I learned a lot. Again, if I was starting from scratch, I'd definitely go for smaller curtain rods in diameter. This would have made the overall experience and product much better. It's also a good idea to be mindful of not screwing down too hard on the rods. Whilst just normally using the floppy you will get marks on the rods, it's best to try avoid denting them so that they actually last a long time. But overall, this DIY floppy is a great starting point for anyone out there like myself who's looking to begin experimenting with light shaping on a bit of a budget. I'm certain the quality isn't on par with the proper $400 plus professional floppies out there, but it's enough to get started and seeing how you can integrate these tools into your own productions. I've always believed that not having the absolute best tools shouldn't stop you from learning and advancing your craft, and hopefully this video has helped you take that first step or maybe even inspire you to come up with a better DIY floppy solution of your own. And if it did help you in any way, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Alright guys, thank you. I'll see you in the next one.